We are going to look at the season of treason tonight. So stick around. We are going to look at FISA. We're going to look at signals intelligence. We're going to see just exactly what that looks like in our everyday lives. So with that said, here we go. You're watching Big Tech. If you're not on YouTube land, you can go to PATRIOT'S.com. You can go to the shows tab, find the banner that looks like this, Big Tech, Biologic Internet Gateway Technology. You can get the show notes that way. It's underneath the category Read, Watch, Think for Yourself. And there's an archive location there for all the notes. We are on episode 68. And we are going to go through surveillance, the FISA drop that was Q3487. That was a document that was posted to DNI. It talks about FISA and signals intelligence. We're going to look at the executive order for telecommunications. We're going to look at the electromagnetic spectrum. And then we're going to look at a technology called backscatter. And we're going to see a little bit how that works with some videos. And then we're going to look at a Facebook patent that talks about being able to remotely power your device, turn on the camera, turn on the microphone, and likely other things, collect information, and then transmit it back over the network, back to Facebook. So with all that said, let's get going.
You guys know what this represents? Tell us. Maybe it's the economic voice. Let's just talk with the economic voice.
Shame on you, Chairman Nadler. Shame on you. You've broken your oath. But you know what? Keep doing it. Keep doing it because the American people see through it. It's going to work in President Trump's favor. Keep it up.
It feels at times like being in the eye of the hurricane. You can never tell when you're going to step out of the eye into gale force winds.
The country needs a credible resolution to these issues. And if confirmed, I will not permit partisan politics, personal interests, or any other improper consideration to interfere with this or any other investigation. I will follow the special counsel regulations scrupulously and in good faith, and on my watch, Bob will be allowed to finish his work.
The testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God.
To what extent did the Russian government interfere in the 2016 presidential election?
Could you repeat that, ma'am? It's outside my purview. This is outside my purview. That's beyond my purview. I can speak to that.
You can't speak to that. After 22 months of investigation, there's not any evidence in that document before us that any voter changed their vote because of their interference. And I'm asking you, based on all of the documents that you reviewed.
That was outside our purview.
Sir, the Constitution says treason is punishable by death. You've accused your adversaries of treason. Who specifically are you accusing of treason?
Well, I think a number of people, and I think what you look is that they have unsuccessfully tried to take down the wrong person.
Let me take to Twitter. The president talking about it at length once again, and he is fired up, let me tell you. He says, look how things have turned around on the criminal deep state. They go after phony collusion with Russia, a made-up scam, and end up getting caught in a major spy scandal, the likes of which this country may never have seen before. He adds this, what goes around comes around.
The only question about what the Obama administration was up to is which agencies weren't involved. Now we know it's the FBI, the CIA, the Justice Department, the State Department, the Defense Department, the NSA, and of course, President Obama and the White House National Security Council.
Oh, and there's he's become more famous than me.
What's going, Mr. President?
You have to focus on this because it can get away very quickly, no matter who you have with you, it can get away very quickly. It was a disgrace. Had I not fired James Comey, who was a disaster, by the way, it's possible I wouldn't even be standing here right now want them in the act? Dirty cops, bad people.
Why aren't people going to prison for what they did to the president on the other side? You know, throw Bill Barr in prison. And these things take time.
It was evil, it was corrupt, it was dirty cops, it was leakers and liars, and this should never, ever happen to another president, ever.
You know, it's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
I think in light of all of the things going on, and you know what I mean by that, the fake news, the Comeys of the world, all of the bad things that went on, it's called the swamp. And you know what happened? And you know what I did? A big favor. I caught the swamp. I caught them all. Let's see what happens.
Crystal, excellent video. Really, it was a very, very, very good video. So this here was taken from Q Post 3487. And I don't reference posts a lot, but this information that was posted on the chans was really, really interesting information. So I made a few notes. We're going to review a few things here to kind of set the table for the next few shows. We're going to look at surveillance extensively, absolutely extensively. So I encourage you to stay awake as long as you can. If not, watch the reruns and then tune in for the next few shows, because this applies to you and me and everyone else in the world. And this has everything to do with telecommunications. It has everything to do with who has control over a nation's internet infrastructure. Because when you talk about modern wiretapping, it is with the internet. And we're going to look in detail how that actually manifests and what that looks like. And we are all bathing in these electromagnetic signals that basically provide an opportunity for intelligence to be collected in one way or another. So this is related to USA and Five Eyes. It was originally classified as secret, then it was declassified or unclassified, ODNI. Procedures for the availability or dissemination of raw signals intelligence information by the National Security Agency under Section 2.3 of the Executive Order 12333, raw SIGINT availability procedures. And this originally was set to be classified up until 2041, December 31st, 2041. And we got it last year, I think, or the year before. Nonetheless, we're going to search for some things and we'll read them and then we're going to move forward. The first thing I want to show you is reasonableness. And so it says it has to do with the evaluation of requests. So if you want to request basically NSA level information on somebody, right, through signals intelligence, collection of SIGINT, reasonableness, whether approving a request is reasonable in light of all the circumstances known at the time of the evaluation of the request, including but not limited to, and there's a piece in here I wanted to highlight, and it's E. And it's the likelihood that sensitive U.S. person information known as USPI will be found in that information if known the amount of such information. And so they make this stipulation here so that the individuals requesting should know whether or not they are potentially dancing around somebody's privacy, their Fourth Amendment. And if they are, then certain masking procedures need to take place and other qualifications need to occur. So onward, we will look at MOA next. And it's a memorandum for agreement or memorandum of agreement. And it says before NSA makes raw SIGINT available to a requesting IC element, the element and the NSA must execute a MOA, memorandum of agreement, governing the ability, retention, and use of the information. And so it really, rather than go through all this, what it really does is set clearly defined rules and clearly defined expectations for documentation, and whatever information is collected, it needs to be handled very sensitively and it needs to be disposed of properly. And through some of the other analysis that I've heard on this channel and elsewhere, there are contractors that have contractors that have contractors that basically jack into these networks and these databases, and they can pull NSA level signals intelligence. And so it really begs the question, are these rules and regulations being followed? It says here the memorandum of agreement requires the approval of appropriate high-level officials at the requesting element, NSA and the ODNI, in coordination with the Department of Defense, based on finding that the requesting IC element has satisfied the requirements of these procedures. The terms of the MOA or any renewal of it will not exceed 3 years. That's a long, long time to have an agreement for open signals intelligence collection on an individual. 3 years. It's a very, very, very long time. So we are going to look at Fourth Amendment next. Here it says general protections. Any IC element that obtains access to raw signals intelligence under the procedures will, it says number 1, the Fourth Amendment, take steps to ensure its processing, retention, and dissemination of the information complies with applicable requirements of the Fourth Amendment. And this is a real issue, personally, that I have, because all of the terms of service that we agree to really allow big tech to circumvent this, the Fourth Amendment. And what I mean by that, when we start looking at Facebook using wireless radios to manage power consumption, Facebook Incorporated, right? They literally are able to form these types of graphs. And this is just a basic one where they know where you worked, who you worked with, what you like, who you like, if they're a friend, a spouse, a relative, what you cooked, if you recommended, if you liked it, if you used it, if you played a certain song, if you went to a certain place, if you watched a certain movie, who you went with, what you did, everything, absolutely everything. And it's mapped. And we'll get into a little bit, if we have time, as to what they call, and I'm going to paraphrase here, the likelihood of you doing something, or the likelihood of you accepting something, or the likelihood of you selecting something, in what I would consider predictive behavior analytics. And this has everything to do with Fourth Amendment privacy. And so we're going to dance around what executive level spying looks like and how that translates down to our level. Because the reality is the infrastructure is now in place where the spying is the same, whether you're low man on the totem pole or you're the top guy, i.e. the president, the administration, the campaign, etc. The infrastructure is in place to spy on anybody to any level of detail, basically anywhere in the world at any time. And that is what we have constructed with the cliche of big tech. So we'll go back to this raw SIGINT document for a minute. And we're going to search for another term here. Selection of domestic communication. So it says here, an IC element obtaining raw SIGINT under these procedures may not use a query, identifier, or other selection term that is intended to select domestic communications. So what this means is this is designed, right, to protect users in America while their information is running over American networks. So the way around that, and this is where the Five Eye partnership, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. If you have big tech companies that are running their information over the internet, all they have to do is transmit their information to another office in another country, with your information in it. And now all of your information has left United States soil, went to another country, processed through a corporate server, and they can get around that by saying they're responsible for managing that information. And if the information is managed under quote unquote reasonable conditions, then they can do what they want. And if that means sending the information outside of the United States, all of a sudden now it can be looked at by a Five Eye partner. They can collect, process that information, and then feed that back through the intel agencies. And that's how we start seeing the construct where you've got basically fascism. You have big tech companies that are able to move information around, circumventing laws of a particular country, in this case, the United States, circumventing the civil rights, ultimately extracting the information, providing it to intelligence agencies or whoever else. Pay to play comes to mind. And this provides the dependency that governments have ultimately on big tech. And it also provides the teeth and the power, the fifth column, if you will, the secondary construct or the tertiary construct of government that is the multinational corporation or a conglomerate of multinational corporations that ultimately function as if they are their own government and then sell and contract their goods and services back to sovereign governments. And that is deleveraging the sovereignty and ultimately the power of a sovereign government. And as we move more and more into an online digital space, that power is going to be further and further displaced, whereby big tech and multinational corporations are going to subvert and supplant sovereign governments. And when we look at a one world government and this whole idea of top-down globalization, it's not globalization with one country in charge. It's globalization with multinational companies in charge that have primary control over the industrial infrastructure that's going to make up the telecommunications, transportation, and manufacturing. And of all of that, telecommunications is going to be the central component that runs, drives, controls, and steers the others. Transportation and manufacturing. And if you have control of those components, you control society, you control the world. And so this is why telecommunications is so important, because we're moving into the fourth industrial revolution. We're moving into automation. We're moving into everything connected. So back to signals intelligence as it relates to privacy and spying. So let's look for exception of metadata. We're going to talk a little bit about metadata. I think this is it. This is it. Exception for communications metadata analysis. An IC element receiving raw signals intelligence may conduct communications metadata analysis, including contact chaining of raw signals intelligence, only for valid, documented foreign intelligence or counterintelligence purposes. It may engage in these activities without regard to the location or the nationality of the communicants. These activities are subject to all the requirements of these procedures except for paragraphs B through E, blah, 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 which don't apply. Each year by the 15th, October 15th, the recipient IC element using these provisions of this paragraph will report to the Attorney General on the kinds of information that the element is processing as communications metadata. Metadata, that's all the stuff that doesn't uniquely identify you. Well, let's go back to this diagram here. Metadata would be everything except your physical address or the address associated with your phone number. They actually double speak in this document and say that metadata is a phone number or an IP address, but then they also say that a phone number is not in the document. So there are some circumstantial variations as it relates to how these things are defined, even in the rulings and or the instructions, so to speak, that need to be followed when they're looking at distribution of signals intelligence. But the metadata, when you look at this here, there's a lot of metadata here, where you are when the network took this information, your likes, your dislikes. If they just strip off your unique identifiers, so to speak, which don't really go away. When I say strip off, I'm just saying they mask over them, and they can easily be unmasked. If they just mask over them, then they get your whole profile and you just quote unquote are anonymized. And then they can sell this information based on demographics. They put you in general categories and sell the general categories to advertisers and others. But it's very easy to just take the masks off. And this is the violation, in my view, and the lack of oversight. When you have government overseeing government, or you have big tech having their own bureaucracies reporting to governing bodies, saying that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing with this information. And so the real underlying word here is a lack of accountability. Accountability. What else is in this document before we move on? Definitions. We need to go over the definitions, and here's why. We need to understand what we are, U.S. persons, and for other countries, it would be similar. And the reason I say this is because when we start looking at modern weapons, what would be considered weapons of mass destruction, what would be considered contributing to terrorism, when we look at what types of information are collected, they are all within this section, section 10 of definitions. So it's kind of important. So for the United States, any person, an agent of a foreign power means any person other than a U.S. person who acts in the United States as an officer or employee of a foreign power, or as a member of a group engaged in international terrorism activities in preparation therefore, irrespective of whether the person is in the United States. So what this means is that if you are not a U.S. citizen and you are acting against the interests of the United States, right, then you're an agent of a foreign power. Also, acts for or on behalf of a foreign power which engages in clandestine intelligence activities in the United States, contrary to the interests of the United States, when the circumstances indicates that such a person may engage in such activities, or when such person knowingly aids or abets any person in the conduct of such activities, or knowingly conspires with any persons to engage in such activities. So just remember that a corporation is also considered a person. A corporation is also considered a person. So if a corporation is considered a person, a legal entity, and they have offices in other countries, and they in turn are sharing information internationally, and that has anything to do with the United States, citizens of the United States, officials of the United States, or impacting the national security of the United States, then the corporation itself, being a multinational corporation, has culpability and, in my view, qualifies as an agent of a foreign power. Engages in international terrorism or activities in preparation therefore. As we move into directed energy weapons systems, remote manipulation of the nervous system, when we look at electromagnetics being able to do this exclusively, as well as dancing around the idea of software and AI interfacing with the devices that are nearby you, so it does things like change the flicker rate of your screen or pulse the infrared lasers while you're not necessarily logging into your phone or your device, or modulating the antennas on your phone, or modulating the Qi wireless charging components in your phone, or modulating the speakers in your phone to do things like interface with your nervous system. If that's done through the APIs that are on your phone, the little tiles on your phone that give companies access to your hardware, and those companies are linked to, tied to, have software that allows access by a foreign country, then those are considered, in my view, weapons of mass destruction. because they impact a lot of people and they can do a lot of damage. And when we look at modern weapon systems, it doesn't stop with nuclear, chemical, or biological anymore. We're dealing with complex electromagnetic phenomenon, if you will, and AI that's able to take all of the hardware devices, all of the hardware components on your devices and potentially weaponize them. The sensor platforms, they're sensors for a reason. They have to either receive a signal or they have to transmit a signal and receive a change in that signal. And that, quote unquote, is a sensor. We will look at sensors as time goes on because these have everything to do with signals intelligence, especially when they do things like measure your biometrics and map your face and map your voice and understand your emotions and record all of these things that go into a biometric profile that are stored in cloud databases such as Microsoft and Amazon for groups like the CIA, Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol, and on and on and on. And this is just domestic for those of us in the United States. This isn't even counting apps and companies like TikTok, for example, and many, many, many others. So, moving on. Engages in the international proliferation of weapons of mass destruction or activities in preparation thereof for, on, or behalf of a foreign power, or knowingly aids or abets any person in the conduct of such proliferation or activities in preparation therefore, or knowingly conspires with any person to engage in such proliferation or activities in preparation therefore. So what does that mean? If we know that modern weapon systems exist as software, as AI, and we know that the mobile devices, computing devices, modern connected devices possess the potential to be destructive to a person, a family, a community, a country, then companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter and telecommunications companies that knowingly purchase and install foreign assets into the telecommunications network, if they knowingly participate in the deployment of the software or the hardware that impacts a society, if they knowingly participate, then they qualify as an agent of a foreign power. So, any person, including a U.S. person who knowingly engages in clandestine intelligence gathering activities. Well, let's go back to this real quick. Would you consider all of this information gathered on you, who your friends are, who your family is, who your spouse is, who your children are, what you ate for dinner, what music you listen to, what you do online, where you go, when you go, how much money you spend, and what your emotional state of mind is when you participate or interact with people, places, and things? Do you think that that is considered intelligence gathering? I submit to you the answer is yes. And I submit to you that the terms of service is the legal basis by which this is done by the multinational corporations, big tech and telecom alike. That you forego your privacy as a requirement to use the products and services. You have to forego your privacy to use the products and services, and the same entities consider themselves utilities as platforms. So that it's a catch-22 for the user, for the general population, and it's complete and total protection for the multinational corporations that make up the software and the hardware components of the internet. What else is in this document? This is what I interpret when I read this stuff. So I'm sharing my thoughts with you. Pursuant to the direction of an intelligence service or network of a foreign power, knowingly engages in any other clandestine intelligence activities for or on behalf of such a foreign power, which activities involve or are about to involve a violation of the criminal statutes of the United States. So these are the kinds of things that they circumvent by piping all of this information to another country so it can be soaked up and analyzed outside or off of US soil. And so now let's bring into play the satellite networks that are going up that technically aren't on US soil. If you were to pump this information up into space and it's no longer on United States soil, and it's running over networks that are run and managed by multinational corporations, up to and including Tesla. Pause for effect. So what happens then? Basically, what happens then is that the Constitution becomes an illusion. Your Bill of Rights become an illusion. Your civil protections are an illusion. And these systems can be turned around and weaponized. They can extract every last bit of money from you. They can understand everything about your profile, whereby you can then be given specific stimuli, which we'll look at in the Facebook patent, to then steer, guide, and direct you throughout your life. And at that point, one must consider, where is my free will? At what point are you foregoing your free will? And we haven't even begun to add in the weaponization of these systems as it relates to direct interface with your nervous system, which definitely violates your free will. This is just coercion through propaganda and creative advertising and all of that. When we start looking at the overlays of the manipulation of the nervous system and the direct extraction of brain waves, then we'll layer that on top of the propaganda and the coercion, which is kind of the stuff that you can maybe glean out of a diagram like this. We're almost done with this document, folks. Communications about a U.S. person are those in which the U.S. person is identified in the communication. A U.S. person is identified when the person's name, unique title, address, or other USPI, U.S. United States person's information, is revealed in that communication in the context of activities conducted by that person. Oh, activities conducted by that person. You mean like who I'm talking to, who my friends are, where I work, what I cooked for dinner, what movie I watched, what theater I went to, what song I played, whether or not I liked it. That kind of stuff that they're already collecting for their social networks. I think that's what they're referring to here. United States personal information. The context of the activities conducted by that person or activities conducted by others and related to that person. Social networks. Remember that term, social networks, because Fitbit uses it, Google uses it, Facebook uses it, Twitter uses it. Who you follow, who you friend, who you're around, what your device, your phone, when it's nearby another person's cell phone, if it repeats that over a period of time, that becomes part of your social network. So they know who you work with. They know who you play with. They know who you socialize with. They know who you avoid. They know where you go. They know what you eat. They know what time you go there. They know how much money you spend. They know what your satisfaction or dissatisfaction level is. All of these things are cataloged, and all of these things are absolutely relevant when it comes to unique personal information beyond, in my view, a person's name, unique title, address. This falls under other United States personal information revealed in the communication. And we'll get into what communications are as it relates to backscatter communications. remotely powering your devices so the microphone camera can be turned on, information recorded and transmitted back to Facebook. That in addition to looking at, managing, updating, downloading your emails, your contact information, web history, and everything else that's listed in the patent that we'll get to in a few minutes. And that's all done without any power supplied to your phone except what's dancing around in the ambient atmosphere known as electromagnetic radiation. Communications metadata means the dialing, routing, addressing, or signaling information associated with a communication. It does not include information concerning the substance, purport, or meaning of the communication. So this is the general delineation they're making. Everything it takes to send and receive a communication without your quote unquote personal information. And I call BS on this. This is a very blurry line. And the metadata is just a simple masking over that can easily be unmasked. The two principal subsets of communication metadata are telephony metadata and electronics communication metadata. Telephony metadata includes telephone number of the calling party, the telephone number of the called party, the date, time, duration of the call. It does not include substance, purport, or meaning of the communication, meaning what you guys talked about. Well, up here, it says U.S. person is identified when the person's name, unique title, address, or other USPI is revealed in the communication context. Do you think that in the digital age today, that your phone number, your IP address, or your home Wi-Fi address, or your work address down to where your cubicle is, when we start looking at being able to identify somebody within a 10-foot proximity in all three dimensions, up, down, left, right, forward, and back, don't you think that those are unique addresses for you rather than just your mailing address when you were there every day? If that information was bought and sold, that's potentially very threatening to somebody. If they know where you eat lunch every day, if they know where you sit at work every day, if they can identify where you live based on the repetition of the times that you log into your Wi-Fi and for how long and during which times of the day, i.e. overnight, every single day. For electronic communications, metadata includes the information appearing in the to, from, CC, and BCC lines of a standard email or other electronic communications, which means who you sent an email to, you, meaning you're the from party, who you CC'd it to, and who you BCC'd it to of a standard email or other electronic communication. So you can extrapolate out what these things would look like in other forms of communication, like who you send a tweet to, who you DM in Discord, who you text message. For email communications, the from line contains the email address of the sender, and the to, CC, and BCC lines contain the email addresses of the recipients. Metadata also means information about the IP address of the computer from which an email or other electronic communication was sent. Depending upon the circumstances, the IP address of routers and servers on the internet that have to handle communications during transmission of the exchange, which means they can trace the network path to where you are located and where you were when you sent or received communications. And this creates a timeline that when you look at this, you can apply a timeline to where you were when the device checked in and provided information about you. Metadata associated with electronic communications does not include information from the subject line or the reply line of the email or the information in the body of an email. Give me a break. You're telling me that these people who are grossly violating our rights are going to not have access to the subject line or read what's in the body of the email. All of the information needs to be collected. And the idea of metadata is that the private information is masked and the other information is not. When they are looking for raw signals intelligence. And I hope we're starting to see the power of Facebook and the power of Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok as it relates to those apps and others, many, many others. We're not even talking operating systems, Apple, Google, Microsoft, having access to all of the applications and all of the hardware on your device, being able to look at everything, and then potentially transmit the information about anything and everything they want on your device without your device being powered, without it being plugged into a wall, without it having a battery in it, without you noticing that your battery is being drained, because it can literally power it from the wireless networks that already exist around us. And this is why, in my view, the telecommunications is so important. The telecommunications focus is so important. Because whoever controls the telecommunications, which is far beyond your phone to your Wi-Fi, or far beyond your phone to that first cell tower. Whoever controls the internet is going to ultimately control the world for the next 50 to 100 years. And modern day spying has everything to do with what is possible these days over the internet. Contact chaining is a process by which communications metadata is organized. It shows, for example, telephone numbers or email address that a particular telephone number or email address has been in contact with or has attempted to contact. Through this process, computer algorithms automatically identify not only if the first tier of contacts is made by the seed telephone number, that's the target of interest, or email address of the target of interest, but also the further contacts made by the first tier of the telephone numbers or the email address. So that's 1 degree of separation. So if I'm talking to somebody on a regular basis and I'm being surveilled, they also get surveilled because they are that first tier. And so now you can see potentially what the benefit of this kind of information collection looks like, especially if you're not complying with FISA, because then you can go out to second tier, third tier, fourth tier, and on and on and on. And you'll know everything about user A, user B, user C, user D, user E, and on and on and on. Are they a relative? Are they a friend? Are they a coworker? If they are a coworker, how intimate is their relationship? If it's intimate, well, maybe that coworker needs to be looked at. Well, that coworker has other friends at work, and they have other family, and they have other people that they deal with. And so you can see how the spider webs out. And so something like Facebook, Twitter, Google, Apple, even telecommunications companies having access to everybody's device, being able to have massive constructs of information, gathering all of this data, using machine learning and data analytics to form profiles and dossiers of everybody. And I'm not even talking about NSA. I'm talking about what's possible when you sign away your rights by agreeing to the terms of service, whereby in theory, these companies actually have greater freedom to spy than the NSA. Imagine that. Domestic communication means any communication where the sender and all of the intended recipients are located in the United States. And that was acquired under circumstances in which a person has a reasonable expectation of privacy and a warrant would be required for law enforcement purposes. A person that has a reasonable expectation of privacy forgoes that when they agree to the terms of service. And so you can see how valuable companies like Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Twitter, Google, and even telecommunications companies, how valuable the collection of this information, albeit just metadata, yeah, right, if they can contract products and services back to the government. because now these companies perform NSA-like functions without the restrictions. It's treason, folks. And it's a violation of our civil rights. It's a violation of human rights when you get down to it, because I think they've already gone offensive. And to the degree of offense, that I think at this point is what is up for debate. And I'm sure we'll see some of it, but not all of it, as it relates to public disclosure. But this information, targeted steering of ads, targeted steering of directions when you Google Map something, and they already know what you're generally inclined for, and they can steer you to a McDonald's instead of a Burger King, for example. In my view, that's weaponized. It's a very, very gentle type of a weapon, but you can take that concept where it would nudge you in the direction of where a McDonald's is versus a Burger King or a Frosty Freeze or whatever the hell it is that's nearby you. And you can take that to whatever extreme you want. Let's say swinging votes for an election, for example. This is also how they will get around domestic communication. If these companies pipe the information overseas to a parent office, a sister office in another country, in Europe, China, wherever, then all of a sudden this information is wide open. And then they can just pipe it back after it's already been filtered, processed, and whatever else. And so cleaning out the intelligence agencies also means setting new expectations with Five Eyes and others, in my opinion. What else is in here? Publicly available information, means of information that has been published or broadcast for public consumption. So here's the circumvention where they use big tech to basically get whatever they want without these rules. It's available on request to the public, is accessible online or otherwise to the public, is available to the public by subscription or purchase, could be seen or heard by any casual observer, is made available at a meeting open to the public, or is obtained by visiting any place or attending any event open to the public. Well, this is a gray area, because if you're the government and you want to define the public as a group of people performing censorship or moderator functions in a corporation like Facebook or Apple, they're considered the public. So if they're looking through all of this kind of information, figuring out ways to sell products and services to you, or understanding what needs to be censored so that you can be steered and directed, socially engineered, from a government perspective, in my view, that may be considered public, because it's not a government entity doing that. It's a public corporation. Private corporation performed in a public space. Loophole after loophole after loophole after loophole after loophole. So, what else is in here? The term U.S. person means any of the following: a U.S. citizen, an alien known by the IC element concerned to be a permanent resident alien, an unincorporated association substantially composed of U.S. citizens or permanent resident aliens, a corporation incorporated in the United States, except for a corporation directed and controlled by a foreign government or governments. Gray area, folks. What about the multinational corporations? A corporation or corporate subsidiary incorporated abroad, even if partially or wholly owned by a corporation incorporated in the United States, is not a U.S. person, which means these corporations, if they are multinational, are subjected to signals intelligence by the military and civilian apparatus on an ongoing basis if they are a multinational corporation. the way I read this. A corporation or a corporate subsidiary incorporated abroad, even if partially or wholly owned by a corporation incorporated in the United States, is considered not a U.S. person. So I think big tech and big telecom, for that matter, are going to have some explaining to do, especially when they go over just exactly what they're doing with people's personal information, domestically or transmitting it outside of the country, doing what they do with it on their own networks, and then what happens to that information? How is it fed back in? So, what is U.S. person information? It is information that is reasonably likely to identify one or more specific U.S. persons. U.S. person information may be either a single item of information or information that, when combined with other information, is reasonably likely to identify one or more specific U.S. persons. Well, arguably, that could be metadata. What I mean by that is if your device is with you all the time, you call the same people, you go to the same places, you work at the same place, you make the same amount of money, you spend the same amount of money at the same places, you frequent the same movie theaters, restaurants, on and on and on and on and on. Well, that metadata now is reasonably likely to identify you as a specific individual. And so you can see the proverbial circle jerk that is this entire document. Because once habits are formed, the metadata ties you based on your habits to your device or to the network, which by definition, a lot of those components are metadata, which is defined as not specifically defining you. But that's where the behavior piece comes in. And that's, again, the value of companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google, and on and on and on, is because they can understand behavior profiles with a high degree of certainty that it's you. And that now all of a sudden becomes very, 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 very valuable, because that is just using metadata to quantify and define and understand you and your behavior. Depending on the context, examples of U.S. person information may include names or unique titles, government-associated personal or corporate identification numbers. Do you have a user ID at work, an employee ID? Unique biometric records, huge, unique biometric records. We are going to spend a great deal of time focusing on biometrics and what biometrics are. That's the majority of what we focus on this show. This is something you can't get rid of. You can't change your DNA. You can't change your fingerprints, your iris, generally your voice, your behavior mannerisms, the size and shape of your body, your response to specific types of stimuli. Those are all unique biometric identifiers. Those are what's stored and cataloged. That is how you can be identified with or without a mobile device that is assigned to you next to your person, nearby your person. Whether you think it or not, you are constantly under surveillance because of your biometric records. And the modern systems can measure and evaluate your biometrics through commercial public networks. They can do it with the use of other people's devices, even if you're not carrying a device. If you go into a public space and there are other devices around that don't belong to you, those can potentially be used to identify you. In addition to the cell networks, the cell towers, and everything else. There's no escaping the intelligence apparatus at this point anymore, folks. That's why we need to understand what a Bill of Rights looks like for the internet. And then ensure that we have strict adherence to accountability and to distribution of punishment after quote unquote due process, which is really what this is all about, right? we don't have due process at this point because the system is rigged. There is no due process. We are being steered around by the noses at some level or another, whether we want to admit it or not. Because this stuff is scientific, sociologic, anthropologic, psychologic. You are profiled, quantified, monetized, and then viewed and used as a piece of livestock. Let's move on. Oh, before we go, this was updated and signed 15 December 2016 by Clapper, James Clapper, and by Loretta Lynch on 3 January, just before the transition of the new administration. So let's look briefly at this executive order. There's more to this than just the surface. This executive order basically is creating a parallel construct to oversee or to look at similar things that the FCC is supposed to be looking at. What do I mean by that? This is a formation of a bureaucracy that consists of the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, the Secretary of the Homeland Security, head of any other executive department or agency or assistant that the president deems appropriate. The Attorney General shall serve as the chair of the committee. The following officials shall be advisors to the committee, right, with no role in the duties set forth unless delegated by the Attorney General, the chair, Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Commerce, Director of the Office of the Management and Budget, United States Trade Representative. Okay, well, most of these have to do with the economy because they see that telecommunications is going to be the critical linchpin for the success or the failure of our economy in the fourth industrial revolution, whatever that looks like. Director of National Intelligence, Administrator of General Services, Assistant to the President for the National Security Affairs, Assistant to the President for Economic Policy, Director of the Office of the Science and Technology Policy. Interesting. Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, any other assistant to the president determines appropriate. What this does is it sets a foundation for a bureaucracy of the heads of government to look at the national security impact and the economic impact of foreign participation in the United States telecommunications sector. And they didn't say infrastructure, they said sector, because big tech is part of the telecommunications services sector. When you think about the products and services that are provided over the internet from companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, all of your media companies, all of those companies to some extent are in this sphere of a telecommunications service, a service that utilizes the telecommunications network, which these days is everything. And when we start looking at sensors, it's going to blow your mind what is potentially possible and what potentially is already being done to the public. And folks, the higher on the food chain you are, for those of you out there lurking that never show your faces, the higher on the food chain you are, the greater the attention that you have as it relates to the offensive techniques that we're going to get into as time goes on in this show. This technology is for the sheeple, but it for sure is useful for those that govern society, because that is the public domain. What happens in the public domain ultimately is the acceptability what is acceptable for that society. So what's done behind closed doors, clandestine, cloak and dagger, covert, black ops, whatever cliche you want to use, that's one thing. How all of that happens in the background, how that translates out into the public space has to do with the officials that govern a society. And so those officials in those positions in America, we could say the administration, presidential administration, Congress, state government, county, city government, law enforcement, first responders, anything that has to do with public interface, they are the ones that are going to be subjected to these modern weapons systems that we are going to go over in detail, piece by piece. And this is why this executive order is so important. Whoever controls the infrastructure of the internet has technologic supremacy and will have economic supremacy and will have intelligence supremacy. And ultimately that translates to military supremacy. So we're going to look at backscatter technology for the rest of today. We're going to look at the electromagnetic spectrum first. We're going to review this and we're going to push through, and whatever we don't finish, we're just going to pick up on the next show. But I want to refresh the electromagnetic spectrum because I want to illustrate for you just how much we're bathing in intelligence.
Something surrounds you, bombards you, some of which you can't see, touch, or even feel. Every day, everywhere you go. It is odorless and tasteless, yet you use it and depend on it every hour of every day. Without it, the world you know could not exist. What is it? Electromagnetic radiation. These waves spread across a spectrum from very short gamma rays to X-rays, ultraviolet rays, visible light waves, even longer infrared waves, microwaves, to radio waves which can measure longer than a mountain range. This spectrum is the foundation of the information age and of our modern world. Your radio, remote control, text message, television, microwave oven, even a doctor's X-ray, all depend on waves within the electromagnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic waves, or EM waves, are similar to ocean waves in that both are energy waves. They transmit energy. EM waves are produced by the vibration of charged particles and have electrical and magnetic properties. But unlike ocean waves that require water, EM waves travel through the vacuum of space at the constant speed of light. EM waves have crests and troughs like ocean waves. The distance between crests is the wavelength. While some EM wavelengths are very long and are measured in meters, many are tiny and are measured in billionths of a meter, nanometers. The number of these crests that pass a given point within 1 second is described as the frequency of the wave. One wave, or cycle, per second is called a hertz. Long EM waves, such as radio waves, have the lowest frequency and carry less energy. Adding energy increases the frequency of the wave and makes the wavelength shorter. Gamma rays are the shortest, highest energy waves in the spectrum. So, as you sit watching TV, not only are there visible light waves from the TV striking your eyes, but also radio waves transmitting from a nearby station, and microwaves carrying cell phone calls and text messages, and waves from your neighbor's Wi-Fi, and GPS units in the cars driving by. There is a...
Did you get all that? Just Let this sit for a minute and let this kind of soak in. How many Wi-Fi addresses do you see? How many Wi-Fi routers do you see when you look at your available Wi-Fis? How many cell towers are around you? Do you know? What about GPS, satellite television? How many connected devices do you have in your house? Because every one of them has multiple antennas at this point. All of those things emit electromagnetic energy. Digital television broadcast, AM, FM radio towers, satellites, cell towers, multiple. Wireless devices around you, multiple. Wi-Fi routers around you, multiple. Televisions, computers, laptops, tablets. They all emit electromagnetic radiation. And they also emit infrared and visible light and other things. But this is raw signals intelligence, is the understanding of all of these waves in real time and understanding how they change and what those changes mean in real time. Being able to take that and process that information and come up with something tangible. There's this many people in the room. They are identified as person A, B, and C, but by name, by profile. They are doing this or these functions. They are this far apart from each other. They are saying these things. They are typing these things. They are writing these things. They are watching these things. They are doing these things. They interact with fill in the blank. They do it with this amount of frequency. They spend this much money. They go here. They work there. Because everywhere you go, these things, these waves are everywhere. So just remember that your biometrics, and we will look at micro impulse radar. We will look at ultra wideband radar. We will look at Google radar technology. We will look at Wi-Fi technology, and I will show you in detail exactly what they can figure out about you, whether you have a device on you or not. How you feel, your emotional state, whether or not you're healthy, the size of your organs. They know everything. They know everything about you. And they don't even need a device assigned to you to do it. Let's move forward here, and I want to let's see what we got right here.
Spectrum called visible light. Data from multiple wavelengths help scientists study all kinds of amazing phenomena on Earth, from seasonal change to specific habitats. Everything around us emits, reflects, and absorbs EM radiation differently based on its composition.
Everything around us emits, absorbs, or reflects radiation differently depending upon its composition, which means that we all have a unique signature, a unique identifying signature. That's if you were naked. If you wear the same shoes every day, if you wear the same wedding ring every day, if you carry the same keys, the same phone, the same bag, the same pencil or pen, the same earrings, the same chain, the same watch, then those also have unique signatures that also can be used to evaluate and certify that you are you with a higher and higher level of probability. Signals intelligence.
A graph showing these interactions across a region of the EM spectrum is called a spectral signature. Characteristic patterns, like fingerprints within the spectra, allow astronomers to identify an object's chemical composition and to determine such physical properties as temperature and density. NASA's Spitzer Space Telescope observed the presence of water and organic molecules in a galaxy 3.2 billion light-years away.
Okay, chemical concentration, physical composition, density. If they can identify this stuff trillions and trillions of miles away, do you think your Wi-Fi router can do it with you 10 feet away, sitting on your couch? Unique spectral signature, and then the sub-signatures within. And if you've been listening over the last few episodes, we've talked about being able to go down as far as specific genes or protein in DNA as it relates to being able to resonate it with electromagnetic energy to identify specifically what it is, a gene or a protein, and also to manipulate the epigenetic expressions of cells using electromagnetic energy to resonate the DNA and or the cell to get epigenetic changes to occur. This is the power that we are handing over without any accountability or expectation that it's going to be used with the public interest in mind. So, backscatter radiation.
In this project, we ask if it is possible to connect battery-free devices to the internet, and can we do this using the wireless networks around us? The challenge, however, is that traditional networks like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth consume 2 to 3 orders of magnitude more power than can be harvested from the TV, cellular, and Wi-Fi transmissions all around us. We introduce a new communication mechanism we call Wi-Fi backscatter. Say we have a Wi-Fi router and a Wi-Fi enabled laptop. Instead of transmitting complex Wi-Fi signals, the RF-powered device encodes data by either reflecting or not reflecting the Wi-Fi router's signals. These reflections result in changes to the Wi-Fi signal strength that can be detected using off-the-shelf devices like laptops, smartphones, and Wi-Fi routers. Since we do not generate Wi-Fi signals and only reflect them, we can communicate with these devices using less than 10 microwatts of power. Here we see Wi-Fi backscatter in action. The setup consists of our Wi-Fi backscatter transmitter, an oscilloscope showing the transmitted signal, an off-the-shelf Wi-Fi receiver, and the received signal strength and encoded data on the computer screen. You can see that as the Wi-Fi backscatter device modulates the antenna, we see the corresponding changes in the signal strength at the Wi-Fi device. In this way, we can transmit data to Wi-Fi devices using a minuscule amount of power. We believe that this would enable internet connectivity for billions of battery-free devices, hence enabling the vision of RF-powered Internet of Things.
RF-powered Internet of Things, where the power is supplied by the radiation that's moving through the air that provides communication to other devices that are powered. Backscatter is using that energy. It's using that energy for communication with devices that don't have their own power source. Ambient backscatter. As computing devices become smaller and more numerous, powering them becomes more difficult. Wires are not often feasible, and batteries add weight and bulk, cost, and require recharging replacement that is impractical at larger scales. Ambient backscatter communication solves this problem by leveraging existing TV and cellular transmissions rather than generating their own radio waves. This novel technique enables ubiquitous communication where devices can communicate among themselves at unprecedented scales and in locations that were previously inaccessible. Ambient backscatter transforms existing wireless signals into both a source of power and communication medium. It enables 2 battery-free devices to communicate by backscattering existing wireless signals. Backscatter communication is orders of magnitude more power efficient than traditional radio communication. Further, since it leverages the ambient RF radio frequency signals that are already around us, it does not require a dedicated power infrastructure as in RFID. Here we go.
In this project, we introduce a new wireless primitive called ambient backscatter that enables interactive devices that compute and communicate without any batteries. To create a visual sense of what we have set out to do, we created devices that have no batteries and yet can interact with users and communicate with other devices. Here the user initiates communications by swiping the touch sensor on the left device. The right device blinks an LED to confirm reception. The cool thing here is that neither of these devices have any batteries. Ambient backscatter enables wireless communication by leveraging the signals all around us instead of generating our own. Say two devices, Alice and Bob, need to communicate. Alice can send a message to Bob by either absorbing or reflecting signals from a nearby TV tower. So for example, Alice sends a 0-bit by absorbing all the incident TV signals and a 1-bit by reflecting these TV signals. Alice and Bob do not generate their own RF signals, and they use no batteries. Thus, ambient backscatter enables wireless communication out of thin air. Here we demonstrate an offline payment application. Each card has some onboard value. This battery-powered payment terminal reads and displays the initial value in card 100. Its initial balance is 110. Then, with no terminal present, touching a button on card number 209 transfer funds directly to card 100. The entire transaction is powered by ambient RF. Now we use the payment terminal to check the new balance on card 100. It has increased to 130. This is just one example of what we can enable by using existing wireless signals as both a source of power and a communication medium. Now imagine a world where everyday objects such as keys, wallets, and sunglasses are enabled with ambient backscatter tags. These tiny battery-free devices can leverage ambient Wi-Fi, TV, or cellular signals to communicate with each other and localize themselves. For example, if a person loses his keys, the couch can use ambient backscatter to communicate with the lost keys and alert the user. This technology will enable smart homes, smart cities, and an Internet of Things. Tiny ambient backscatter devices can also be embedded deeply into inaccessible sites, such as concrete walls, floors, or roofs. Since embedded devices have no battery, they last forever and require zero maintenance. Such tags can leverage ambient signals for sensing and communication and enable long-term home monitoring and industrial applications. Beyond these example applications, what we are doing is transforming existing ambient RF signals into a source of power and a communication medium. This new functionality can create opportunities in multiple application domains.
Okay, so backscatter provides power, provides communication. Something just occurred to me, and I'm going to digress real quick to something else, and I'll show you why. What I want to show you is this. Do you remember this patent that discusses being able to biologically network every single cell in the body? Well, if you don't, go to Twitter. It's pinned to the top of Human Internet One, at Human Internet One on Twitter, and you will see this pinned to the top. It's an AT&T patent that's able to biologically network every single cell in the body. So the reason I'm sharing that with you is this. When we look at Charles Lieber's patents and things like this, nanoscale networks, nanotech in the body, that's how these things are going to be powered. They will be powered with backscatter type technologies, terahertz waves or other backscatter type technologies, because they're too small to have a power supply. So they'll literally harvest power by just resonating and communicate the same way by just resonating. And this is where we're going with the nanotech, is that Everything is just like they said, the keys, wallet, sunglasses, everything will have a transmitter receiver in it that will then harvest energy out of the ambient environment, communicate with things like nano routers and gateways, including pieces of metal and other components that are embedded in your brain and in your body, because we are to be considered the Internet of Things. And here's a nano RFID chip. It's a single carbon nanotube. Fully functioning radio from a single carbon nanotube. Here's a patent for triggered self-assembly of nanoparticles in the body. It can be triggered by any form of radiation. You can look this patent up. Triggered self-assembly of nanoparticles in vivo. Scaffolds comprising nanoelectronic components for cells and tissues. Cell scaffold can be interfaced in some embodiments with one or more electronics and external electrical systems such as a computer or a transmitter, for instance, a radio transmitter or a wireless transmitter. In some cases, electronic testing of cell scaffold may be performed before or after implantation. This is a Charles Lieber patent. Cyborg tissue can be created whose biologic functioning depends not only on the cells or tissues, but on the electronic components as well, such that the distinction between the biologic and the electronic systems become blurred. And that's the way out there stuff. There's another patent from MIT here, controlled subcellular construction and assembly expressions. Metals and nanocrystals. This is, you want to talk about these vaccines, folks. We're going to digress. Let's just digress all the way. Remote electronic control over hybridization behavior of DNA molecules by inductive coupling of radio frequency magnetic field to a metal nanocrystal covalently linked to DNA. That is something that they've cited in this patent, the entire disclosures of which is incorporated herein by this reference. And it talks about being able to use specific energies and specific directing of energies to control assembly and switch molecular assemblies on and off. The invention features molecular scale devices that may be used as bistable switches and bidirectional molecular assembly lines and molecular memory devices. The devices are composed of molecular subunits and shuttles that move between the subunits. As used herein, the term molecular is used to indicate the components which make us use the device are truly molecular scale and components. They misspelled. Controlled subcellular construction and assembly. There's a patent here for this. And so the point is this: when we start looking at backscatter, well, here's a paper that George Church participated in. It's talking about molecular, I take that back. I don't know if George Church participated in this one. Towards molecular computers that operate in a biologic environment, where they're talking about using DNA that functions as a computer, and you can have nanotech that functions as a communication device out to the ambient world, that functions as a transmitter and a receiver and a power supply, and then you can have DNA and RNA function as a computer. Electromagnetic wireless nanoscale sensor networks. That's from Georgia Tech. We'll go back into the nanotech stuff as time goes on. AT&T Career Development Chair Professor Deblina Sakar. She's part of MIT's Media Lab. She's participating in the cybernetics program, which is an R&D development focus from AT&T's Research and Development Lab. They're literally working on cybernetics. And so when we look at what cybernetics may look like, what does that look like? In my view, it has to do with things like being able to harvest energy, transmit and receive communications with things like Wi-Fi to devices that don't have their own power source, whereby the energy just is emitted into the room and electronics can communicate without having their own power supply. With that said, we have half an hour. Let's burn through this Facebook patent. Facebook, using a wireless radio to manage power consumption. Particular embodiments of a wireless communication system comprise a wireless device, right? And a base station, so cell phone and a router, tablet and a router, cell phone and a cell tower, having at least one network connection and a radio frequency transceiver. So they've got an antenna on them, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, CDMA, GSM, UMTS, some type of a cell antenna or a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi antenna or a Zigbee antenna, radio frequency transceiver. The base station may be configured to generate a radio frequency signal and communicate with the wireless device using backscatter communication. That means no power is necessary for the receiving device to be able to communicate back. The base station provides the power through the electromagnetic transmission. The wireless device may be configured to generate operating power for the wireless device. That sounds repetitive, right? So a wireless device communicating to a wireless device or a base station communicating to a wireless device can generate the power to communicate with another device, whether that other device has a power supply or not. The RF signal, I'll read this again. The base station may be configured to generate operating power for the wireless device from the RF signal that's transmitted and to receive data transmitted using the RF signal and communicate data to the base station using backscatter communication. Power supply from the base station or from a cell phone transmitted to another device, a cell phone or a tablet. It's able to power the device, extract information and or power the device, collect information by turning on the sensors. Camera and microphone are great first examples. Collect information and then send it back to the network, all using the radiation that's transmitted from the Wi-Fi or from the cell tower. And the device collecting the information or delivering the information has no power to it at all. The battery can be out, and it can still collect information. So we are going to breeze through this as fast as we can. My chat died, so I had to reload chat. All right, so according to one aspect, a wireless communications device that operates without batteries is provided. According to another aspect, a wireless communications device that can perform some communication functions without drawing power from a battery that is provided. And another aspect is a wireless communication device can perform some communication functions using a minimal amount of battery power and significantly less battery power than current communications devices is provided. So, a wireless device, cell phone, tablet, television, computer, thermostat, alarm system, camera, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It could be a remote control for a game system, which they provide as an example in here. Anything can receive energy, whether it has a power supply or not. It can provide information, whether it has a power supply or not. It can use some of the power from a provided power supply in order to preserve the battery life and use some backscatter radiation for power. There are 3 different levels of power consumption that we're talking about here. So, we're going to skip past this because I've kind of explained that in detail. According to one embodiment of the method of providing communication between a wireless device and a base station, the method may include using an image sensor of the wireless device to capture an image sensor, a camera. An image sensor can also be an antenna when we start looking at the type of mapping that can be done with things like Google Soli, Google's radar, and ultra wideband radar, micro impulse radar. There are other companies out there that provide the same type of thing. An image sensor, for all intents and purposes, at this point, we could just say is a camera until I can show you otherwise. Providing that data right? Concerning the image that was taken to the base station. So the base station provides the power to the wireless device. It turns on the camera or the antennas or both, takes images, video, still frames, doesn't matter, and then transmits the images or the video back to the base station, all using power provided by the base station. According to another embodiment, the method may include receiving text data by the wireless device and providing data related to the text data to the base station. A wireless communications device includes a battery configured to provide power to operate the wireless communications device. We'll just call it a cell phone. In the first mode of operation, a processing section coupled to the battery and configured to operate on battery power in the first mode of operation. So a cell phone has more than one mode of operation. And an RF interface configured to receive an RF signal, radio frequency signal, and generate operating power from the cell phone device from the RF signal in the second mode of operation. The wireless communications device, the cell phone, is configured to detect available radio frequency power and enter the second mode of operation from the first mode. So it can sense how much power is available in the ambient background radiation. And if it's enough, it'll turn off the battery and pull power straight out of the air, is what it's saying. So it's dynamic. It'll use the amount of battery power that's necessary. So it gives you a moment of pause when you start hearing, oh, this cell phone will give you 17 hours of battery life. Well, just exactly what does that mean? Is it really that the phone is really operating that much more efficiently, or is it doing things like this? Is it pulling the energy out of the ambient air? And it also begs the question, can software tell the transmitter providing the power to crank up the power so it can do more with the power harvesting than use the battery? And is that healthy? Is that healthy? To have software on your phone crank up the power of your Wi-Fi so that it can use the energy transmitted from the Wi-Fi that's plugged into the wall so that you have the perception of a long battery life while that thing's next to your breast or your nuts or your uterus. In some embodiments of the invention, provide low power wireless communication devices operable in some examples without the need for a battery. And in other examples, wireless communications devices include a battery, but have multiple modes of operation, at least some of which require no or little draw of power from the battery. So what we've been talking about. The wireless communication devices in different examples include wireless headsets and handsets having a microphone and or speakers operable with a number of different types of devices, such as a cordless telephone system, cellular or wired telephones, RF communication systems such as walkie-talkies, audio music players, remote controls, computer systems, including desktops, laptops, and tablet computers. In other examples, wireless communication devices are provided that operate such as cellular phones, cameras, video game controllers, smartphones, tablet computers, and other devices that communicate over a wireless network to a base station that may include connections to one or more wired or wireless networks. In at least some examples, wireless devices are powered from RF signals that may or may not include input data for the wireless devices. Further, in at least some examples, wireless communication devices utilize backscatter communication techniques to communicate with the base stations or other wireless devices. According to one embodiment, the base station is connected to a power source. Power source may be an electrical outlet. The base station may also include one or more network interfaces for coupling to one or more wired or wireless networks. A LAN, local area network, a wireless local area network, that's your Wi-Fi, a wide area network, a WAN, that would be like a commercial cell phone infrastructure, a cellular network, or a public switched telephone network. According to various embodiments, wireless communications devices may include one or more mobile phones, iPhones, headphones, headsets, including a microphone and an earphone, music players, iPods, personal digital assistants, iPads, laptops, computers, or cameras. According to one embodiment, the wireless communication device convert the received radio frequency signal into DC voltage to power internal components of the wireless device. In one example, the wireless communications device do not include a battery. The RF signal is the only power source. Do I need to remind you that this is a patent from Facebook that discusses being able to collect your information and map just about everything about you using these technologies? Let's continue. The wireless communication device is close enough to the base station such that the strength of the radio frequency signal emitted by the base station is sufficient to power the wireless communication device. Depending upon the functionality of the particular communication device, it can begin receiving data or sending data to the base station. According to one example, the wireless communication device may be between 2 feet to about 60 feet from the base station. In other examples, distances between the wireless communication device and the base station is between 1 inch and 5 feet, about 1 foot and 10 feet, between 2 feet and 10 feet, between 2 feet and 20 feet, between about 5 feet and 20 feet, and between about 5 feet and 30 feet. In other embodiments, depending upon the radio frequency communication technology used, other distances are possible. Yeah, some of you in chat are kind of getting it. That's good to see. As described above, the wireless communication device receives radio frequency signal from the base station. In one example, the base station is continuously emitting an RF signal. And when the wireless communication device enters an area sufficiently proximate or nearby the base station, it begins receiving the RF signal. Now, if this is used for a more efficient, it's a greener network for those of you in government that may or may not be listening. If this is being sold as a greener, more efficient way to run a communications network, because it takes less energy to send and receive information on a backscatter, but it requires consistent and persistent RF energy to be radiated into an environment, that is not in the best interest of the public, is it? According to one embodiment, the RF signal is transmitted at frequencies between about 840 megahertz and about 960 megahertz. These are standard digital television and or first responder network, hashtag AT&T took the 50-state contract, and or commercial band cell communications is what we're reading right now, and Wi-Fi. 840 megahertz and 960 megahertz. The RF signals transmitted in the ISM band frequencies, which is the science band and medical band. Also between 2.403 and 2.483 gigahertz, which is used for Wi-Fi. Other embodiments, the RF signal transmitted at 5 gigahertz, between 4915 megahertz and 5825 megahertz, which is the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi function for the newer Wi-Fi routers. According to another embodiment, the RF signal is transmitted in the UMTS LTE band frequencies, which may be about 800 megahertz to about 850 megahertz, 900 megahertz, about 1500 megahertz, which is 1.5 gigahertz, 1700 megahertz, which is 1.7 gigahertz, 1800 megahertz, which is 1.8 gigahertz, 1900 megahertz, which is 1.9 gigahertz, or about 21 megahertz, which is 2.1 gigahertz. In particular embodiments, the RF signal may be transmitted at 60 gigahertz, which is used for WiGig, and this is a common frequency that's associated with 5G. There are many, 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 many other frequencies associated with 5G, but all of your modern routers and all of your modern phones that have Wi-Fi which is every phone, every tablet, now are able to communicate with 60 gigahertz, which means they transmit 60 gigahertz. And when we look at the antennas again, they scale. They are tunable antennas, so they can scale using the same chipset from a 60 gigahertz down to one of these UMTS LTE bands or to a 5G band, low band, mid band, or high band, which are typically below the 60 gigahertz, ranging from 6 gigahertz up to 48 and or up to 72. In that case, it's above 60 gigahertz. These antennas will be tunable, meaning they can scale and tune to any of those frequencies to satisfy the user's need and desire for a 2-second 4K video download. Never mind that it can then resonate through the plethora of frequencies on demand, controlled by the software that's ultimately run and dictated by companies like Facebook. So they can do things like understand everything about you, including your health, your emotional state, whether or not you're pregnant, and on and on and on. And we will review that again. They talk about different examples of data. It may represent audio input from a microphone, optical data from a camera, or text input from a keyboard or a keypad. It talks in this patent about how it's done. A multi-layer coil, a microelectronic transformer that has different turns of a coil. So you think of a power transformer, it's the same thing, only it's done on a chip. 400 turns, 500 turns, 600 turns, 700 turns, up to 900 turns, multi-layer coils, complex power transformers using magnetic fields to convert ambient background radiation into DC power to remotely interface with your device. It talks about being able to sample the voltage signals. And I highlighted these to give you an idea of how fast this stuff functions. It functions in the microseconds, hundreds of microseconds, down to 1 microsecond. That's how fast it can pick up the voltages, convert the voltages, read the voltages, sample the voltages, and the types of power. We're talking about nanowatts of power being able to be inserted into your phone or into capacitors over a period of time to power your device and spy on you. Nanowatts of power, which gives rise to question, do those block it pocket things really even work? If it filters out 90% or more of the signal, just because you don't get notifiers, does it really mean that Facebook or the intelligence apparatus still can't get into your phone when we're talking about power consumption of nanowatts? Femtojoules. A joule is a unified version, a metric of energy, a joule. And they're talking about 11 femtojoules, which is a stupidly small amount of power. 337 nanowatts of power, 200 nanowatts of power. Nanowatts to be able to interface with your device. Microfabricated transformers. The substrate may be silicon or another selected material suitable for microfabrication. It talks about primary windings, having a primary current, having a switch module. So that switch module can then tune. It can tune based on what radiation's out there. It can tune the number of turns that it wants to engage or energize to regulate the power, the current, the voltage, or to tune to the right ambient background radiation. Complex, sophisticated circuitry. And we're just talking about a power supply to your phone that emits a magnetic field, by the way. And if it's switchable, it can then oscillate. And we don't even want to go tonight into what oscillating magnetic fields can do to things like the nervous system and the brain. Just another component in a device that has the potential, in my view, to be weaponized, in addition to spying on you. What else is in here? In one embodiment, wireless communications device is in dual mode. We've already been through this. This is why I highlighted it. It talks about being able to communicate with the base station, whether or not it uses a battery or not, to receive messages, for example, email messages, web content, text messages, and phone calls without drawing power from the battery. In the second mode, the wireless communications device draws power from the battery and can perform all the functions of a typical wireless communications device of its kind. In another embodiment, in the first mode, the cell phone device operates using the radio frequency signal and draws minimal DC power from the battery. This may be considered as battery-assisted passive mode. Email messages, text messages, web content, phone calls. In particular embodiments disclosed herein, any type of data may be transmitted to or from the wireless communications device, either without drawing any power from the battery or by only drawing significantly less power than the current communications devices. Listen closely. Any data. Such data may include, by way of example and no limitation, email, text messages, multimedia messages, video chat, video conference transmissions, alerts, notifications, calendar updates, address book, contact list updates, news feed stories, images, or video. In particular embodiments, the base station may transmit software updates, firmware updates, or configuration updates to the wireless communication device. In particular embodiments, the wireless communication device may transmit, by way of the base station, data to be replicated to a remote storage disk. So, taking your data off your device and storing it in the cloud, collecting your personal information with or without your consent. In particular embodiments, the wireless communication device may transmit data captured by sensors of the wireless communication device to the base station. By sensors. That does not limit it to microphone and camera, folks. Sensors, all sensors. We will look at sensors ad nauseum. We have looked at sensors ad nauseum. We will do it again. Social network systems may be transmitted by way of the base station to and from wireless communications devices. Such transmissions may be using the RF signal or backscatter communication channel. Now we're getting into social networking. In particular embodiments, the data may be transmitted without the wireless communications device activating any visual or audio alerts. You won't even know that it's transmitting the information. In particular embodiments, the wireless communications device may include a capacitor or a power storage system with a low power leakage for storing power generated from the radio frequency signal. Interesting, huh? So it can harvest it up and charge up a capacitor that can then dump larger amounts of power into your phone, which may then be used to power a visual or audio alert. Using either a component integrated in the device or a peripheral device that requires more power that can be obtained just using the RF signal. Wireless communication device can be in sleep mode and continue to receive messages while performing a method without drawing any power from the battery, greatly extending the life of the battery. So this all talks about social networks. We have 8 minutes left, so I doubt we're going to get through all this. Figure 12 illustrates an example of a social network environment associated with a social networking system. It includes a user, a client system, a social networking system, a third-party system, which are The terms of service, we share information with amongst our affiliate companies and as well as third parties. Do you consent? If you don't consent, you can't use the service. That's, third party systems connected to each other by a network. Although Figure 12 illustrates particular arrangement of a user, client system, social network system, and a third party system and a network, this disclosure contemplates any suitable arrangement. So this is just an example. This is just a basic example. It's like showing the ABCs to a preschooler, folks. When you start looking at the complexity of data analytics, AI, machine learning, and fusing together what would be a complex biophysical, psychological profile on every single citizen. This is Crayola, folks. It talks about the different ways that it can send the information. Sonnet stuck out to me. Sonnet is a backhaul type system. So when we look at NSA type technology, Sonnet is being converted over to Ethernet. They're taking out Sonnet networks and they're converting the backhaul networks and the major fiber pipelines into Ethernet to make Ethernet the single unified standard from satellite out to your router, Ethernet. And Sonnet would be things that the NSA, for example, would tap into to gather everybody's information. It talks about the different relationships. Edge relationships may represent a friendship, a family relationship, business or employment relationship, a fan relationship, a follower relationship, a visitor relationship, a subscriber, a superior or a subordinate relationship, a reciprocal relationship, a non-reciprocal relationship, any other suitable type of relationship, two or more such relationships. Moreover, although this disclosure generally describes nodes as being connected, this disclosure also describes users or concepts being connected. What are we talking about? We're talking about using this backscatter technology to collect all kinds of information about you without your battery being used, without you necessarily even knowing that these types of profiles are being collected on you. And we are just getting our toe in the water, folks, when we start talking about spying on a president. What I'm trying to illustrate for you here is the complexity of the architecture by which anybody with access can log into the network anywhere and hop around globally and extract everything about you. Everything about you. And that is what I will attempt to illustrate for you on subsequent shows. Examples of things, right? The user may like, attend, play a song, listen to a song, cook, work, or watch. These are all different behaviors that they then categorize and catalog. In particular embodiments, social networking system may determine a social graph affinity. Right? An affinity, various social graph entities for each user. An affinity may represent the strength of a relationship or the level of interest between particular objects associated with an online social network, such as the strength of a relationship with another user, a concept, maybe your political beliefs, your religious affiliation, the content that you like to watch, actions that you take, that you perform or that you witness, different advertisements, other objects associated with online social networks, or any suitable combination thereof. Affinity may also be determined with respect to objects associated with third-party systems, fusion technologies, fusing of data from many, many, many different places to form these affinity relationships. The overall affinity may change based on continued monitoring of the actions or relationships associated with this social graph entity. This, your affinity, your likes and your dislikes, your behaviors, your mannerisms. Although this disclosure describes determining particular affinities in a particular manner, this contemplates determining any suitable affinities in any suitable manner. In particular embodiments, the social networking system may use a variety of factors to calculate a coefficient. These factors may include, for example, user actions, type of relationships between objects, location information, other suitable factors, or any combination thereof. In particular embodiments, different factors may be weighed differently when calculating a coefficient. They're talking about your affinity and what the likelihood it is that they can calculate what you're doing, and they put it in terms of a coefficient. The weights for each factor may be static, or the weights may change according to, for example, the user, the type of relationship, type of action, the user's location, and so forth. Predictive programming analytics. And we are just about out of time, and there's so much more to cover with what they can do with this stuff, folks. So maybe we'll pick up these social nets before we move back into surveillance.